Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Britain's Defense Minister Ben Wallace has met with Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov in an unannounced visit to the capital, Kyiv. At a joint press conference, Mr. Wallace said that Britain had supplied Ukraine with long-range missiles, the Storm Shadow, because Russia's constant use of its long-range weapons to target civilians and critical infrastructure against all international law and the Geneva Conventions.
Target civilians and the latest weapon that the United Kingdom has supported Ukraine in using and indeed acquiring is the Storm Shadow deep strike missile. And while it is the first long-range missile supplied to Ukraine by its allies, we supplied it because of Russia's constant use of its long-range weapons to target civilians and civilian critical national infrastructure against all international law and the Geneva Conventions. And despite being requested by me back in December not to do this, they have continued to indiscriminately kill and target Ukraine, people in Ukraine. Ukraine's right under United Nations Charter to defend itself is indisputable. And in that self-defense from an illegal act, it has every right to ask for support from its friends and allies. And international law applies to us all. It doesn't just apply to some. And so Russia is discovering that the allies of Ukraine will stand by them in that self-defense and provide whatever support they need, from anti-tank missiles to tanks to Storm Shadow and now even F-16s. President Putin must realize he cannot win this illegal war he started. And no matter how many Russian soldiers he sends to their deaths out of his ego and imperial ambition, he will not succeed, and the international community will only get stronger in their opposition to this aggression. We will always be standing by Ukraine, and not only through this war, but long after it.
The Ukrainian military is set to receive 100 support vehicles from Japan's self-defense forces following a handover ceremony in Tokyo. Ukraine's ambassador to Japan, Sergei Korosunsky, added that attended the ceremony at Japan's Ministry of Defense to accept the vehicles, saying the handover of the military vehicles for the first time was significant. The handover is coming after Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida promised further support to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky at the G7 summit in Hiroshima last weekend. Kishida's offer included vehicles as well as food, rations, and medical care for the injured soldiers. The Russian military says that it has routed militants who had attacked a Russian border region with armored vehicles the previous day, killing more than 70 Ukrainian nationalists and pushing the remainder back into Ukraine. The Belgorod regional governor says that one civilian has been killed at the hands of the Ukrainian armed forces in what appeared to be one of the biggest incursions from Ukraine since the conflict began 15 months ago. Two purported anti-Kremlin armed groups employing Russian-based abroad said that they were responsible for that attack in Russia's Belgorod region. The Belgorod governor says the army and other security forces were still mopping up and has asked residents who had not been evacuated not to return yet. Meanwhile, Ukraine's government had said that it was watching the situation but had nothing to do with the Belgorod attack. It also said the same in March when one of the groups, which Moscow said consisted of far-right Russian extremists managed by Ukrainian intelligence, mounted an incursion into another border region. Former President Dmitry Medvedev, now deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, declared Kyiv's denial was lies and that the attackers deserved to be exterminated like rats. Mr. Medvedev, who was speaking during an official visit to Laos, where he held talks with senior government figures, including President Stolgolon, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, said that Russia was conducting its special military operation in Ukraine in part to ensure that such incidents could not be repeated. A political scientist, Mark Ghilotti, has said that fighting in Russia's western Belgorod region and a cross-border incursion from Ukraine is a shaping operation and not a game changer. Ghilotti said the Russian volunteer forces covered a variety of different political perspectives and were controlled by Ukrainian military intelligence.
In and of itself, this is not a game changer. This is probably more than anything else what in the military terms would be called a shaping operation, preparing the battlefield for the inevitable and probably looming Ukrainian counteroffensive. Instead, this is really a chance to do two things. One is to rattle the Russians, make them worried about the possibility of risings amongst their own people, but secondly, force the Russians to disperse their troops, to move some of their reinforcements towards Belgorod region, hopefully, I think Ukraine must hope, opening up areas for sort of a major attack in the next week or so. These Russian volunteer forces, they cover a whole variety of different political perspectives. There are liberals and anarchists all the way through to neo-Nazis. And in their own way, they all have a reason for wanting to see the current Russian regime fall. So yes, absolutely, they're hoping that in some small way they can contribute to the downfall of the Putin regime. But at the same time, we have to realize that these are not independent forces. Although the claim is, Kyiv is saying this has nothing to do with us, these are just Russian volunteers, they are controlled by Ukrainian military intelligence. They rely on the Ukrainians for weapons and support and such like. So in some ways, they are accepting that they are part of the Ukrainian war effort simply because they believe that a Russian defeat in Ukraine hastens the downfall of the regime in Moscow. I think that's the one key thing that brings them all together. They all want to see the Putin regime fall.
In the meantime, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says that Moscow will react extremely harshly to further attacks by fighters entering its territory from Ukraine. His comments are coming after Moscow said that it had defeated an attack in the Belgorod region. Groups that claimed responsibility for the Belgorod raid, the Freedom of Russian Legion, and the Russian Volunteer Corps say they compromised armed Russian fighters seeking to overthrow President Vladimir Putin. The casualty claims by the warring sides have not been independently verified. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller says that the United States is skeptical of reports that U.S.-supplied weapons were used in an attack inside Russian territory, adding that Washington does not encourage or enable strikes inside Russia. However, Matthew Miller said that it is up to Ukraine to decide how to conduct this war.
An attack, whether using U.S. weapons or not, but
you're skeptical of these reports. Either you know or you don't.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says that China and Russia should further upgrade economic trade and investment cooperation and expand cooperation in energy. Xi said in a meeting with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin in Beijing that China is willing to continue to support issues concerning core interests it shares with Russia. The Russian Prime Minister says that ties with China are at an unprecedented high level. He also signed memorandums of understanding with China, including an agreement to deepen investment cooperation in trade services, a pact on export of agricultural products to China, and another one on sports cooperation. Mishustin also is the highest-ranking Russian official to visit Beijing since Moscow sent thousands of troops to Ukraine in February last year. His visit is coming after Russia and China reacted furiously to the Group of Seven Nations weekend declarations that singled both countries out on a range of issues, including Ukraine. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says that European Union countries have provided 220,000 artillery shells to Ukraine under a landmark scheme launched 2 months ago to ramp up supplies of ammunition to Kyiv to help fight off Russia's invasion. Mr. Borrell said the EU states had also given 1,300 missiles under the same scheme and were on track to hit a target of supplying 1 million pieces of ammunition within 1 year, even though some EU countries have avoided endorsing that goal as feasible. EU governments agreed on the ammunition scheme in the month of March after Kiev warned that it was in desperate need of artillery rounds as Russia's invasion descended into an intense war of attrition with thousands of shells fired every day.
As I understood it today from the European Commission and also the High Representative, we are on track on the ammunition. And that is very important. But I think we need to be very vigilant. We need to encourage the industry to increase its production because we know that Ukraine still needs ammunition and also for a longer period of time.
We are ready to start this training, but it hasn't started yet. But of course we are ready to start this training. I propose to join this training to the European Union military mission, which is conducted by Poland on the Polish soil.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that Ukrainian training pilots on Western F-16 fighter jets does not make NATO a party to the conflict if it has allies pledged to speed up preparations to start lessons. Stoltenberg said that Ukraine had the right to defend itself, and earlier senior Russian diplomats said the transfer of F-16 jets to Ukraine would raise the question of NATO's role in the conflict.
I will leave it to individual allies to make announcement exactly about when they start training. But of course also with the announcement by President Biden this weekend, the US being of course the main provider of, for instance, F-16s, and also announcing clearly that they will start training. This is an important step. That partly will enable us to then deliver fighter jets at some stage, but also is sending a very clear signal that we are there for the long term. And we have to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. Ukraine has the right of self-defense. They are defending themselves. And the right of self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter. We help Ukraine to uphold that right. That's our right to help them protect UN law, international law, against the war of aggression. That doesn't make NATO and NATO allies party to the conflict, but we are supporting Ukraine to defend themselves against a war of aggression, a brutal invasion by President Putin. It is always, of course, important to discuss new platforms, planes, battle tanks, air defense systems, but as important, or perhaps even more important, is it to ensure that all the systems which are already in Ukraine work and function as they should. And to do so, they need ammunition, they need fuel, spare parts, maintenance, and repair capacity. So the sustainment, which also then include ammunition, is absolutely critical. This is now a war of attrition, and a war of attrition becomes a battle of logistics, and then production, ramp-up production is absolutely key.
A Russian court has extended for 3 months the pre-trial detention of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was arrested in March on espionage charges. He was initially ordered held until May the 29th, and on Tuesday, a court extended his detention until August the 30th. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matt Miller, in a briefing, said that representatives from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow attended the hearing, although they were unable to speak with the reporter, as being detained at a time when relations between Washington and Moscow are at the lowest point since the Cold War because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February last year.
The hearing today was that it was a hearing on whether to continue to detain him, and they extended that detention by 3 months. I believe the Embassy Moscow will have a statement coming out. I thought it would be out before the briefing, but if it's not out, it'll be out in the next few minutes with any more details, but I don't have any more details from what happened inside the court. for we have been in close contact with Evan's parents since immediately after his detention. We did not help arrange their travel. I will just say personally, I can only imagine how difficult it must be to see your child detained overseas, especially to be detained wrongfully. And so I'm certainly not going to criticize any parent for wanting to see their child. But that being said, we do have a level 4 travel advisory for Russia, and just speaking generally, we do not advise that U.S. citizens travel to Russia. But we have expressed our concern from the minister level. Secretary Blinken had a conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov about Evan Gershkovich's detention already this year. We've engaged with them at a number of levels. Our embassy in Moscow has engaged with them. We've engaged with them here. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of those conversations. As I said yesterday, we found that oftentimes when it comes to wrongful detentions, it's unproductive to the release that we seek to talk about all of the conversations we have publicly. But we have consistently pressed the case that number one, Russia needs to fulfill its consular obligations, and number two, they need to immediately release him as well as Paul Whelan.
White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre says that U.S. President Joe Biden is deeply concerned about Russia's security services decision to extend the detention of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Jean-Pierre also said that Gershkovich and American citizen Paul Whelan should be released from Russian detention immediately.
We are deeply concerned that Russia has extended the pretrial detention of Evan Gershkovich by an additional 3 months today. We have been very clear that the claims against him are baseless. Russia should release Evan and Paul Whelan immediately, and will continue to be very clear on that point.
And the United Nations Security Council has held a meeting on the threats to civilians in armed conflict. The subject of the meeting was the global effect of war, but many speakers focused on the toll paid by civilians from the war in Ukraine. Moscow initially opposed extending the grain export deal unless demands regarding its own agricultural exports were met. While Russian exports of food and fertilizer are not subject to Western sanctions, Moscow says the restrictions on payments, logistics, and insurance have all amounted to a barrier to shipments.
The Black Sea Initiative and Memorandum of Understanding to promote Russian food and fertilizers to global markets help to stabilize markets, bringing down prices and ease the food crisis. Ukraine has been able to export over 30 million metric tons of food. That includes life-saving grain transported by the World Food Programme to support humanitarian operations in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Yemen. I welcome the Russian Federation's confirmation that it will continue to participate in the Black Sea Initiative for another 60 days. But outstanding issues remain, and representatives of Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations will keep discussing them. Looking ahead, we hope that exports of food and fertilizers, including ammonia from the Russian Federation and Ukraine, will be able to reach global supply chains safely and predictably. This is foreseen in both the Black Sea Initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding, the implementation of which the United Nations is fully committed to support.
Of course, this war has also had a devastating impact on vulnerable populations in countries far from Ukraine. Millions and millions more people have been pushed into food insecurity as a result of this conflict. Why? Because Russia has used food as a weapon of war in Ukraine. And for months and months, Ukrainian grain leaving the Black Sea was blocked. Grain that many countries, especially in Africa and the Middle East, rely on. That's what makes the Black Sea Grain Initiative such a critical arrangement, one that has been a beacon of hope to the world. Last year, the Black Sea Grain Initiative facilitated the safe export of more than 50 million tons of food, including wheat used for humanitarian operations in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Yemen. We must ensure this life-saving aid continues to flow to those in need, including women and girls, older adults, disabled persons, and other marginalized groups that are disproportionately affected by food insecurity.
After the break, in just a moment, we still have VOA's correspondent Anna Chernikova, who will talk more on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Plus, raging wildfires in Canada burned through over 1 million hectares in Alberta. For the details, please stay with us.
Millions of people living.
Welcome back. Now let's hear from VOA's Anna Chernikova, who joins me now on the details about the Ukraine war. Anna, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
Good evening.
Let's begin with the Belgorod attack. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said he promised a harsh response. Ukraine, on the other hand, has denied involvement in that raid. What do you make of this?
Definitely we do not have any confirmations and any independently verified information except of Russian reports and except of the announcement by these Russian volunteer groups who actually conduct certain actions, as we can see, on the territory of Russia. According to the Ukrainian official comment that came in on the same day when it was publicly known that these Russian volunteer groups have entered the territory of Belgorod region with certain military actions. Ukrainian officials said that Ukraine has nothing to do with this and that Ukraine is no Ukrainian citizens are involved in this. And this is pretty much what we have on the official position of Kyiv and official Ukrainian position, which has not changed, and no new details, so no new comments have been provided. For the moment, we know that these groups have confirmed that they are acting at that area in order to protect Ukrainian civilians from more shelling, and they are kind of trying to create certain safe zone on the border with Ukraine. Again, of course, we can say that this kind of actions are happening because Russia invaded Ukraine more than a year ago, 6 years ago, but the full-scale invasion started more than a year ago. And definitely these internal actions in Russia probably are caused by such activities conducted by Russia. But again, this is something that Russian citizens are conducting on the territory of Russia, and this is certain internal actions. We do not have much information. I can even say we don't have particularly verified and independently verified and confirmed information. So we can only comment on what Russian officials are saying and what these military groups are publicly saying. But definitely this looks like a certain problem for Russia, definitely making Russian military preoccupied trying to solve this situation.
Anna, two Russian paramilitary groups opposed Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying that they were behind the attack and even seeking to overthrow President Putin. Yet all fingers are still pointed to Ukraine. Do you think that Russia is embarrassed of its own attack in its region? Remember, they have been accusing Ukraine of various attacks, even an attack, supposed attack on Moscow some time ago also.
Again, this looks like, let's put it this way. In Ukraine, a lot of people and experts are very skeptical about this. And of course, everyone understands that Russia is definitely time to time using this tactics of accusing Ukraine in certain actions which never been confirmed or never been verified that Ukraine actually did it, neither by Ukraine nor by allies and international community and international experts, international officials. So, and this is similar situation. So we don't have any other confirmation that Ukraine is somehow involved except of what Russia is saying. So no international position which would confirm that or nothing like that. So I think that it could be a part of a game, a Russian game, Russian tactics, because this was already, as you correctly said, this was already in use, and we already experienced that and witnessed that. So. So I think that we should wait and see how all this situation will either evolve or stop. But again, as I already said, it looks like it is a kind of actions which continue, and I think that we have to just follow the updates as soon as they come.
Well, we understand also that these Russian paramilitary groups and Russian Volunteer Corps, that's the RDK and Liberty of Russian Legion, entered Russian territory from Ukraine. What does this say about the security at the Ukrainian border?
Well, again, we don't have exact confirmation and exact information on how they entered. At least I don't remember anything like officially confirmed. So we can only guess, and we can only maybe analyze how they've been moving. Again, I cannot say for sure that they've entered from the territory of Ukraine. I don't have this data, and I don't have any verified source and official source that would confirm that.
But what's security in the Ukrainian border like? What's the security there like?
I think that Ukrainian border is probably one of the most secured border in Europe at this point, and definitely Ukrainian. Especially border with Russia. We all understand that Ukrainian forces keep an eye on that very precisely, and because shelling continue, especially in the border area. It's artillery shelling where the artillery distance is possible for Russia. So definitely Ukrainian forces are keeping a very close eye on the border. So again, this situation with Belgorod region and with these groups, I suggest that we wait for more details to come, for more, at least verified from any other expert group or country or official position, except of Russian position, because we cannot look at this situation just from one side.
But has there been any reaction from the Ukrainian side on this? Anything official, or is it just silent about this?
No, it was an official reaction on the first day when this happened, and it was a reaction from Ukrainian intelligence and the advisor to the head of President office, and both statements basically were similar. That Ukraine has nothing to do with this. No Ukrainian citizen or soldier is involved in that. And basically, Ukraine denied any allegations from Russia. Basically these two groups, Russian military volunteers groups, they basically made an official statement, and they took responsibility, saying that they are fighting against Putin regime. So in terms of Ukrainian official position, Ukraine denies involvement in this situation.
All right. The Ukrainian military is set to receive 100 support vehicles from Japan's self-defense forces, which is a much-awaited counteroffensive. As anticipated, Ukraine has been asking for more ammunition every day. How are the troops gearing up for this?
Well, definitely another great news for Ukraine, another great support from another ally, from Japan. Also, it comes together with confirmation of F-16 jets, which was also extremely awaited news here in Ukraine. I think that we have official comment from the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Mr. Budanov, who said that Ukraine has already received quite a lot of equipment and that it might be ready to start this counteroffensive soon. But again, we should understand that this counteroffensive doesn't look like it will be something similar to what happened in Kharkiv or Kherson region, especially in Kharkiv region, when it was unexpected for Russian forces, when it was very fast, and we've witnessed Ukrainian forces liberating almost the whole area at once. Because this is a little bit different. I think that it's even more, pretty much different situation here, because Russian forces are getting ready to this. They're preparing their defense positions as well. And I think that we should expect that certain active phase of this counteroffensive would start at certain point when Ukraine has enough or certain amount. Again, we're not going to be, I guess, informed officially on that, but so enough equipment, but and ammunition. But I think that in some areas, particularly in the Donbas area and the eastern part of the front line, certain actions have already started, and we can see that Ukrainians had certain advances in around Bakhmut, and it was confirmed. So let's see, but but this is something what we have for the moment.
All right, thank you very much, VOA's Anna Chernikova, as always, for your contribution on the world today, and please stay safe.
Thank you.